Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 90. Today's episode features an interview with Bryan Kelly from whatthespeak.com. Bryan offers Communication Diva listeners a valuable tool for anyone who has to speak in public. The acronym S.P.L.A.T provides a framework that will help you create powerful presentations that your listeners will remember. I would tell you what S.P.L.A.T stands for, except I wasn't really paying attention because I was multitasking while I was listening to the interview. However, I'm sure Bryan is an excellent communicator, so listen up.
Hey everyone, this is Jenn Swanson and welcome to episode 90. Hard to believe that many episodes of Communication Diva have transpired. Today I'm bringing you an interview with Bryan Kelly from What the Speak. And Bryan is an award-winning blogger, an entrepreneur, a marketing executive, and he's been featured all over the place. I'm finding Bryan everywhere actually, and I first heard him on the Pat Flynn podcast, Smart Passive Income.com, and he was introduced to me by John Corcoran, who you might remember from episode 56, who sent me an email one day quite some time ago and said, you have to talk to Bryan. He would be fantastic for Communication Diva. So here is the interview with Bryan. I hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, this is Jenn from Communication Diva, and thanks for listening today. Today I'm excited because I have Bryan Kelly here from whatthespeak.com, and I'd like to welcome you, Bryan.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and very excited to share some fun and interesting facts with everybody today.
That's great. I know that I heard you on someone else's podcast not too long ago, and I know that I was in the kitchen cooking when I often listen to podcasts, and I had to put everything down and go get a piece of paper and a pen and take some notes. So,
that's very good.
So I'm excited about today because I think what you've got to say will be of great interest to the listener of Communication Diva. I'd like to just start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, as you stated, I've got a website and podcast that's all about helping people become the best communicators that they can be, regardless of what level that you're at. Maybe you're just getting started. Maybe you are someone who's been doing it for quite a long time, giving presentations and talks at industry events, and you want to go to that next level. So what I do typically is every week I have a guest expert that I bring on, and we talk about their story, their journey, and their unique experiences and insight. And so it's really, really cool and fascinating to be able to uncover these stories that, a lot of these folks, I've had, Nancy Duarte on the show. I've had Chris Brogan. Sally Hogshead was recently on the show just a week or two ago. And these are folks who are big-time keynote speakers. Nancy Duarte obviously is a presentation genius, and a number of my other guests are psychologists, neuroscientists, performance coaches, you name it. Anything that has to do with speaking in public in any way, shape, or form, I'm bringing these folks to my audience and sharing their stories. And there's so many great things that we can all learn, again, regardless of our level, from these individuals.
Absolutely. And how did you begin doing all of this? Because you have a day job too, don't you?
Yeah. Well, what happened is, for everybody who's in my audience listening to my podcast knows this story, so I know it won't bore you guys since this may be the first time that you're hearing this. But I started my career off in the music business, and the way I tell the story is the music business chewed me up and spit me out. I was a performer and singer. Spent a lot of time on the stage in front of audiences and was very comfortable with that. And so when I decided to no longer get kicked in the teeth by the music business, I started a company with a couple of partners, and it was a marketing and design agency. and did that for about 8 years. And during the course of that, I was able to speak in front of audiences in a number of different ways, lots of different size audiences, from a few individuals in a boardroom that we were trying to pitch an idea to, or doing a presentation on a particular product that we were launching to an audience, maybe an auditorium of 50 or 75 people, all the way then to larger groups where I was kind of lecturing on a specific topic or method or whatever it is. So began speaking at a lot of different conferences, and all of that was rooted in my experiences being on the stage as a performer, and was heavily relying upon those skills that I learned to engage an audience, to not make it be about me, but to make it about the audience and what they're interested in and what's going to keep them keep their attention held the entire duration of what that presentation is, so on and so forth. And so a couple of years ago, I was approached by somebody after I gave a talk at an industry conference with a couple hundred people in attendance. And they're like, Bryan, this was so great. I got a lot of great information, but you make this look so flawless. How do you do that? And I was like, well, it's really not. It's not that way. First of all, I have a performance background, so that's kind of my foundation. But this stuff, it takes work, it takes practice, and it's not just something that I can just get out there and wing it. I've put a lot into this, and here's kind of the breakdown. And so then I would get tips and trick type questions from individuals as well. And I thought, gosh, this would be really interesting to start a podcast it's all about this topic and sharing not just my story, my insights, my tips and tricks, but the collective, knowledge of individuals who do this on a regular basis, or have these unique perspectives on. There's more than one way to approach this, and not one particular way is the best way. Everybody's different. Everybody has different styles, and so to uncover that has kind of been my mission, and that's how I got into it.
And so had you ever started a podcast before?
Yeah. So as part of the business that I had, that I ran for 8 years, back in 2006, we started a blog that was all about the topic area that we were focused in. And we did that to kind of, nobody knew who we were, and we wanted to use it as a marketing vehicle. And this was just at the time before everybody and their mother had a blog.
Exactly.
So we snuck in there kind of just before it really started to explode. And within a year or so, we grew dramatically. We had like 40,000 subscribers to the blog. And then we started a podcast where some of the different media publications and conferences and events would have us come, and we would do like live blogging, and then we'd do podcast interviews with like the keynote speakers and other experts at the conference, and then post that live every day at the end of the conference. And that was 2006 to 2009. And really nobody knew what podcasting was back then.
Still don't, some of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a very large percentage of people that don't know, but it's dramatically increased since 2009. And so that was kind of my initial foray into it. And at that time, it was very different. It's much, much easier now, although it does definitely take work to put into doing it. And so that was my prior experience to that, and how I was able to parlay that into what I do with What to Speak now today.
Fantastic. And I think that there are so many people that are looking for help in presenting, even if they're not professional speakers. You have to make a presentation at a business meeting, or you have to make a speech at a wedding. I do a lot of public speaking as well, in smaller formats, I think, but also have some experience in performance, and that does make a difference. But I can imagine that you have a very interested audience in what you're doing. And one of the things that I was fascinated about when I first heard you was the neuroscience behind the topic that you have. So do you want to talk a little bit about that today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is such a great thing because I'm a geek when it comes to this topic, because when you think about neuroscience, we'll just kind of say brain science, because it's a little bit easier to say that, but less syllables, brain science. Yes. I'm not a scientist. I'm not, anybody who's very ultra knowledgeable in this area, but it is something that I have spent time studying and researching for my own personal use. And of course, a lot of the folks that I've interviewed and some of the individuals that I know that are very rooted in this approach, have been a great resource to me. And, some of the things that we'll kind of walk through today this is not Bryan Kelly information. This is stuff that I've uncovered myself, but the research has been done by folks like Dr. John Medina, who has a fascinating book on this topic. David Sousa, Ruth Clark, these are all individuals that research how people learn and how the brain processes information and what it does with that. So understanding these kind of key fundamental pieces of what is happening in your audience member's brain will help you think a little bit differently about how you structure your information, your content, as well as your delivery. And the end goal being that when you're giving a presentation, regardless of whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever the length is, that you'll be able to hold their attention and keep them fully engaged and wrapping their head around what it is that you're sharing so that they can walk away and do something with it. Whether it's, buying whatever it is that you're selling, whether it is taking action on a message that you're sharing that's critical to them making a change in their life, or, whatever it is that you want to do to persuade them to do something after they leave that room. Because if that's not the motivation or the reason why you're standing there, then you're wasting your time and you're wasting their time.
Okay, so how do you begin? What's the most important thing to consider before you start?
Okay, so one of the things that is kind of a fundamental aspect to this is that you want to make sure that individuals are learning while your presentation is occurring. And in order for them to learn, or rather I should say, what happens when they're in a place where they're open to learning is that then they'll be ready to take action on what they've learned. So the fundamental thing that I want to make sure that everybody understands is that learning is actually a biological, chemical, electrical process. And if our audience members' brains are not wrapping their claws, so to speak, around that information that you're putting out there, then no learning occurs. And we've all been in that situation where somebody's just dropping a bunch of data on us.
Ugh, boring.
And and after, a few minutes, you zone out. And it's not because you're being rude. It's just our brains don't know what to do with that. They can't hook into it, and we can't begin thinking about how is this relevant to me? And that's, you probably have heard this saying before. A lot of people always say, what's in it for me? WIIFM. And this is something that is very, very real. There's a neurological process that's either happening or not happening that leads to that. So foundationally, someone's prior knowledge, what they bring into that room, is something that should be considered. And that's where it's really important to understand your audience and their needs, because they need to compare information that they already have, the things that are already in their head, with what you're sharing. And when they do that, that will begin to work its way into their long-term memory, so they'll retain the information that you've just shared.
And that's a bit of respect too, isn't it? I was in a university class not that long ago, and the teacher had obviously not done that piece of it.
Yep.
And had no idea what the prior knowledge of the 20 people sitting in the class was, and so started at a very fundamental, basic spot and proceeded to talk about things that pretty much most of the people in the room already knew.
Yeah.
And so the unfortunate part of it was he didn't build on the prior knowledge in the classroom. He just went ahead with his own agenda, and people tuned out and actually got mad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've all been in that situation, whether it's in a traditional classroom setting whether it's, in our profession, if we're taking some type of continuing education, if we're at an industry conference where, we want to go and learn things about our profession or our industry or, whatever it is. And it's just, you're not getting that. Then it's very frustrating. And like I said just a few moments ago, that it's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah.
And so it's, like you said, it's very much a respect thing. And it's also, having a really good grasp on what's occurring biologically, chemically, et cetera, in everyone's brains. So what I did was, there's 5 principles that we can quickly run through. And there's tons and tons of information on this, but I'll just give you guys a little bit of a taste to kind of put some of these into action right away. They're going to be very helpful to you as you begin thinking about a future presentation or talk that you may give. So the acronym that I created is called S.P.L.A.T. And
I love that.
Yeah, it came to me one day because if you think about your brain as a blender, and let's say we want to make, like a fruit smoothie.
My breakfast smoothie that I just
there
had.
You go.
Yeah, there you go.
So when we do that, we're going to put a bunch of fruit into the blender, aka our brain. And then we hit the blend button, but we forget to put the lid on, and it goes splat. It's all over the place. This is exactly what happens with our brains. This is how it operates. And, if you think about it this way, the brain takes in information through the 5 senses, and then it goes into the center of our brain, which is called the thalamus, and it goes splat. It goes to all the different areas of the brain that process different types of data. So that's where this came from. And the acronym S.P.L.A.T itself stands for, in fact, I'm not even going to tell you. Let's just walk through each of these 5 pieces here. So the S in S.P.L.A.T stands for safety allows for learning. So safety is very critical, and it's kind of the thing that should set the stage for your talk. Now, a lot of people may not necessarily think like, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything that's going to create an environment where people are going to feel unsafe. Unless maybe you're giving a talk on guns or something, I don't know. But what this essentially means is that you've got to make sure that you're not setting people off in a way that puts them on the defense when you're talking. So a couple of examples of this might be, if I were to make a polarizing statement, and sometimes people like to do this. They like to, be a bit provocative and stir the pot. And maybe in certain situations that's good. But if you're trying to get somebody to take a particular action, or you want them to be inspired by your message, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you're not making polarizing statements. Now, let's go a little bit further, something that's even simpler than that, but not something you might think of. Have you been in one of those situations, Jennifer, where the presenter gets up there to give their talk, and they say, okay, everybody, we're going to have a lot of interactivity in this discussion today, or,
Yeah.
It's like the first thing out of their mouth. And what happens is all of us in this room, either, regardless of whether we're, very social or not very social, we all are like, group discussion, like,
Yuck.
I don't want to do that. Yeah. I just want to come and sit down and learn something. Please, please, please don't make me share. So, that's a really good example of how you can turn that on its head. Now, we're going to get into later on in just a moment why group discussion and interaction is absolutely critical for people learning and walking away from that talk. However, what you can do is not make a statement about that. You can just casually get into that and say to the individual, or not the individual, but the group, just, hey guys, we're going to start off with this question, and it could be something as funny as, are you a Mac or are you a PC?
Right.
Go ahead and turn to the person to the left or right of you and just talk really quickly about which one you are and why. And so people, it's a fun thing. It's an icebreaker. you're not really saying, hey, we're going to have group discussion, but you're kind of subversively weaving it in and setting the tone so that when you come back and you ask the next question, maybe in the next 7 to 10 minutes, they're already primed and ready to go and discuss that with an individual. So that's why safety is critical. Creating this environment where people are not going to be, put on the defense. And it's something that's very, at a primitive level that occurs in all of us. And I want to move on to the next one, so I won't get too much into this, but it's very, very critical. We've all been in that situation where somebody pushes our button and we just go crazy, and it goes into, essentially how we used to react back when we were in the primitive days, where we either had 4 responses to something. We had to fight, we had to feed, we had to flee, or, there was the reproductive aspect to it. And so, this is what happens. We still, our brains have evolved, but there is this primitive aspect to it. And you want to make sure that you're not setting people off to where they're feeling emotionally hijacked or uncomfortable, or, I really just don't want to be here. And they completely shut down, or they get up and they walk out and never return.
Right, because you want them to stay with you and not tune out.
You got it.
Yeah.
All right, so moving along really quickly, the P in S.P.L.A.T stands for problem solving is learning. Oh. So this is important because we are all problem centric. We don't really care so much about content. We want to learn in order to solve a problem, and we don't want to learn just for the sake of it. So while, content is very, it's a buzzword today, content
is
marketing,
king. Content
is king.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we don't want content just for the sake of consuming content. We want to find something that matches up with a problem that we have and offers a solution. So that's where we really need to think about, how can we hook our audience? The audience should be asking the question, how do I apply this? So, it's very active, this process of learning, and problem solving puts that front and center and gets individuals thinking about, this is very interesting. I actually had a problem just last week that was similar to what's being described here, and this may work to help me, fix that. So one way that you can do this with your presentation is to out of the gate, set up what we call like learner outcomes or learning objectives. And the really cool thing about this is that when you tell the audience to look for X, the brain goes, oh, I should look for X. And it puts this chemical stamp, so to speak, on the information and says to the brain, or, says to itself, when you find this information, remember, it's important. And this actually happens when you get that X and that information is delivered and the brain says, oh, this is important. Remember this. It actually, there's a release of dopamine in your body. So you get this chemical positive feeling from it. And, this is something that we can have happen, in our talks, where people walk out of that room and they're like, they're excited. They're having an emotional high because they've learned something. We've all felt this, like, oh man, I got this, or an aha moment, and you feel really excited and thrilled and energized. And that's something that's absolutely critical for you to think about on how to do this. And it's very simple. You just set the stage very simply. Here's 3 things that we're going to cover today. Which one of these is important to you? Take a minute to just think about that and which one of these is important to you, because we're going to cover each of these 3.
Huh. So you're giving them what they want, actually. You're telling them what they need, and then you're giving it to them.
Exactly.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so what's the next one?
So the L in S.P.L.A.T stands for lectures do not allow for learning.
Amen.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's hard because so many of us think, oh, well, I just got to get all my information out there. And especially if we're nervous, that's kind of, we just want to get it done. We just want to get that information, out of our head and into the audience heads. But it doesn't work that way. And quite frankly, if you realize this, it will take some of the pressure off of yourself. Because a lot of people think, oh, I've got to give a 60-minute presentation. How the heck am I going to prepare 60 minutes of material? Well, the really cool thing is you don't have to. And I'm going to share that in just a second. But one statement I want to make before I dive into the meat of this particular piece is that we have to remember that our brains are not recording devices. So you can't just expect to pour the information from what you've gathered in all these years that you've been, learning and focusing and developing a particular expertise. You can't just dump that into the brain of your audience. They've got to be given some time to digest the information that you've shared and really think about, how is this relevant to them? So, Jennifer, you may know this question since you're the communication diva. How long do you think the average attention span is right now?
Oh, I know it's not very long. Is it something like 7 minutes?
Yes. Yeah, it is. I've seen it where people say on the low end it's 7 minutes, on the high end it's 10 minutes. So that's a good range. And that's actually the range that I work in. When I build my presentations, I look at these 7 to 10 minute chunks of time and how I can present content for 7 to 10 minutes and then change it up.
Okay.
Now, what we found, I say we, what I found by learning this, but the researchers uncovered this through their studies, was that they charted different 60-minute class lectures. And they always found that at the beginning of the lecture, attention's very high. Everybody's ready to go. What do we got for us? And after 10 minutes, it just falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
And then the funny thing is that what happens is the last 10 minutes, when the lecturer says, in summary, everybody's attention spikes back up. Because they're like, oh, this is the piece that I need to get. I didn't need to listen to the last 40 or 50 minutes of information. So that's where we want to zero in on this idea of 7-10 minute segments. You need something that's going to capture their attention, and you can use stories that are relevant. So that's very important. But something that really gets them to like, oh, okay, this is why this is important to me. And what you can then do, which is critical, is after that 7 to 10 minute window, do about a 2 or 3 minute opportunity for discussion. So lectures, the ROI on learning is completely in the gutter. There's nothing useful for a lecture. But if you can create this window where they're going to talk, and we're going to get to that in just a minute as well. That's another piece of it, is getting your audience talking about this. That's where the magic happens. But one last thing on this topic before we move along is to remember when you were in college, or if you're in college right now and you're studying, you didn't learn from the lecture. You had to take notes. You had to make sure you paid attention when the lecturer said, now, in summary or in closing. And then you would spend hours in the library reviewing the lecture and the content and, the material in the book to learn it. It wasn't during the lecture.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
Terrible.
Yeah.
So bad.
Yeah.
So that's why I say lectures do not allow for learning.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're not just spewing out information, that you're doing it in a way that creates these small little chunks of time for them to be exposed to your message, your idea, your concepts, and then to wrap their own minds around it, to think about it, ponder it just for a bit so that it sticks in their brain.
I'm really glad you said 7 to 10 minutes. My one of my other jobs is I'm a minister in a church, hey? And my sermons are about 10 minutes, so this works out well.
Yeah, that's very good.
I've also had people turn to each other and discuss whatever it was I was talking about at the time, and I have found that those are some of the best. Afterwards, people remember those ones the best. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Good.
It is the way to go. All right. So the A in S.P.L.A.T, as we close this out and get towards the end here, is all audiences are visual learners.
I've heard this. Yes.
Now this is kind of a bomb, because for a long time we've all kind of been exposed to this idea of learning styles, and that there's different learning styles. Some people are visual learners, some people are auditory learners, some people are kinesthetic learners, which means they need to touch things and feel things and whatnot. That's all been proven to be inaccurate.
Huh.
We are all visual learners. And the reason why is that the latest brain science has uncovered that 80% of our brain's processing power is dedicated to visuals.
Is this why when you're blogging and that, they recommend lots of pictures, lots of images?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because when we all stare at a long paragraph or multiple paragraphs of text, we look at it and we say, I don't know. I got a lot of other stuff vying for my attention, and why should I spend my time reading this? And so that's why it's very important to think of ways that you can hook your audience in. And there's, with the written word, there's definitely ways to do that, to pull your audience in, which is definitely a whole nother talk in and of itself. But when we think about in the context of a presentation, this is where we run into the misuse of PowerPoint.
Ugh, yes.
So many of us, and I've been guilty of it, myself in the past, is, many of us are like, oh, I've got a presentation to do, and I've got a few days left before I have to do it, and I haven't spent any time in it. Let me just bullet. Here's my ideas, and I don't really have time to practice it, and so I'm going to put these slides up so the audience can see what I'm talking about, and then I can just read off my slides. And it's horrible. The reason why is because, again, 80% of the brain is dedicated towards processing visuals. So when you put all of these bullet points up on the screen, your audience is reading rather than listening.
Right. If they can see it.
If they can see it. If it's not super tiny bullets or many, bullets with tons of text. So, they're distracted. They're reading it. And also, this is really fascinating, is that when you read, we actually have to process each letter as an image.
Oh.
And it's only by rote repetition that, as we learn to read, that the letters mean certain words. But, we still, even to this day, you can read full sentences. You're processing each letter as a visual. Now, if we flip that around, if I'm giving a talk, let's say on, how to make a certain type of pie, and I'm talking about pears, and I'm talking about a certain type of a pear, I could put the word pears up on the screen, or I could just put an image, a really beautiful, simple, stunning visual of these pears that I'm talking about on the screen, and boom, the audience sees it, and they don't have to think about pears. They're not distracted by reading this word that I'm putting up on the screen. It's reinforcing what I'm talking about, and it's doing so in a pleasing way. So it's really fascinating to think about how you're putting together your slides. Some people say no slides, don't do anything with slides, and others say, well, if you can give your talk without the slides, that's what you should shoot for, but have the slides there so that it does enhance and, drive home this idea of what your message is, and people will retain that information. And so here's some interesting facts about this. I mentioned that 80% of the brain's processing power is dedicated to, processing visuals. That's 6 different parts of the brain working together at the same time to process this information. So that's huge. When we just listen to information, so let's say, I'm giving a lecture and there's nothing else other than my voice, the audience will retain 10% of that information. That's very, very low. 10% of what I said. Now, if you can combine that oral message with a visual that supports and reinforces it, the retention rate jumps up 3.5 times to 35%.
Wow. So if you don't have a slide, if you don't have the capability of doing a slide, any kind of visual, you could bring an object. That would work too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't just have to be slides.
Okay.
And actually, let me clarify. I misstated that. That is if I only gave a presentation with a visual.
Okay.
35% of that information would be retained. Now, when you combine both the oral and the visual, that's when it jumps up 6 times and it goes to 60%. So if I'm speaking and I have a visual, it could be, like you said, an object, it could be a slide, whatever, that recall rate is 60%, which is huge.
That is huge.
Yep. Versus if they just listened to me and they only remembered 10% of what I said.
Right.
So here's the thing. You may be thinking, well, what if I can't use visuals? What if I'm not allowed to use slides? Or what if, it's just not appropriate for the environment that I'm giving this talk? Well, the great thing is that visuals are more than just that like, oh, here's a visual. You can use stories, you can use metaphors, allegory. Really think about ways to paint a picture in the mind of your audience. And when you do that, that's when it will begin to stick. And if you think about it, the oral tradition, that was stories. Through history, generation to generation, stories were told and retold and retold. And it was because they were using visual, imagery in those words that was able to retain, stick in the mind of the person who was hearing that, who then could retell the story. And that's where it goes back to lectures are terrible. Don't just dump information, facts, figures. Those are great things to support your message, but wrap it in a story or a metaphor, as I just kind of described.
Yeah, because like you say, that's where your hooks get into it, right? When it's a good story. I mean, you might not remember anything else, but you remember the story because it was a good story. And it was told well. That's the other thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where if you think about the presentations, keynote speeches, whatever it is, some form of presentation, and the ones that you walked away like, wow, that was great. Some of the elements that you may see are they used visuals in some way, shape, or form, whether it was great slides that didn't distract from the message but supported it, or they told a great story or a number of great stories that you could rattle off right away and remember that information that they shared. Maybe they also had you talk a little bit about what's your experience been related to this information that I just shared? And you didn't feel like, oh, I had to do group discussion or table work or whatever, the format is. You were like, that was awesome. Like oh my gosh, I got so many great takeaways from this talk, this presentation that, I can go and put into action right away. So a lot of those elements you can kind of see as we've walked through this acronym, how those are directly related to some of the best talks that you might have seen.
Right. And T was, again, the last one was...
So I want to wrap up on this one because this is huge. So T, in our acronym S.P.L.A.T, our final piece here is talking is learning.
Talking is learning. Excellent. I'm learning all the time.
as many of us are.
Yeah.
Who talk a lot.
Yeah.
So this is huge because this is how information gets retained. Talking helps us with retention, and it also elicits feedback. So somebody once said to me, and I thought this was pretty profound, is that the person who does the talking does the learning.
Yes.
And that's why so many of us we're experts on our subject matter because we've been talking about it in a lot of different forms, fashions, etc. And so it's just, we know it. We know it inside and out. And when we get up and we talk in front of an audience, we know it. They don't.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we can transmit that to them. So we have to do it in a way to where we get them talking about it themselves. So here's a couple of really interesting facts. The brain can only hold 5 pieces of information for 30 seconds.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It used to be 7. And if you think about how phone numbers are, at least, here in the US, is, like 351-4266. There's 7 digits there. Now they've reduced it down to 5. Our brains are shrinking the ability to retain information because we're outsourcing it to computers and mobile devices and et cetera. So yeah, we can only hold 5 pieces of information for 30 seconds.
Wow. And our phone numbers are 10 digits. So there you
go. And that's why I don't know. I can't even tell you what my mother's phone number is because I just push a button every time. And if I had to actually remember what her number was, I'd be in big trouble.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad, but the truth. The interesting thing is, in order for these bits of information to move into working memory, we have to repeat it. So we have to repeat that information or it will disappear. And our brain neuron is waiting for a repeat signal before it resets itself, and then you forget it and it leaves your memory. Now, if we do repeat that information, it then moves into working memory for 60 minutes or longer. And when you talk, you're processing the information out loud. So you're also hearing yourself process that information again. And that's why, if you think about it, when somebody gives you a piece of information, and let's just use the phone number example again. If I said, hey, my phone number is 351-4266, you're like 351-4266, 351-42. You're repeating it to yourself so that you make sure you can retain it and not lose it before you have a chance to write it down.
Right.
So that's really, a critical thing to understand, is that we need to talk in order to fully move that along to a place where our brains will retain it. Now, I'm sure many of us have been in the situation where we're talking with a coworker and we say, hey, John, I've got a problem. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I'd really like to bounce some ideas off of you and get an idea of what your opinion is. And then you start talking to that person and you kind of talk your way through it. And at the end of that, 10, 15 minutes or whatever, you say, wow, John, that solved my problem. Thank you so much for, talking to me about this. And you're like, I didn't say anything.
Right, because you think out loud. So you're talking to someone else and you're processing and you're coming up with solutions. Okay, I get it. That's
exactly.
Good.
So, the brain science is essentially showing that talking is really important. And by asking your audience very thoughtful questions, they have to think. And when they have to think, they'll no longer be a passive participant in that presentation. They'll begin engaging and thinking about, why is this important to me? What problem will this help me solve?
That's fabulous, because you want to come away with that. You want to come away with things to ponder after you listen to someone speak.
Exactly. So, that one is one of my favorites, and I you can see how I alluded to this, in a couple of the different pieces of this acronym, that creating opportunities, we talked about the 7 to 10 minute window of presenting content and then having a discussion for 2 to 3 minutes is a great way, just one example of how you can get people thinking, talking, internalizing, comparing to their past experiences, the knowledge that they're bringing into that presentation, and then how they can begin to say, okay, this isn't directly related to a problem that I'm having, but, so you start to think through these things as an audience member. And when you leave that room, you completely have been pulled into and drawn into what that presentation was, versus just sitting there zoning out after 10 minutes and then paying attention for the final 10 minutes.
I think that they should teach this in professor school.
Yeah, exactly.
Because honestly, the lectures that I've had to sit through, some of them have been great, and some of them have been somebody standing up there reading their paper, which is the least effective way of learning information or engaging with someone who's an expert that I can think of.
Yes. Well, and that's why, I've often said to people that we spend so much time focusing on developing our expertise that we never truly understand how to communicate that expertise.
Yeah.
And, I can even think back to high school, elementary school, certainly, in my college years. Most of my educators, teachers, professors, I don't remember most of what that was. However, there was the 10% or so of those individuals that were passionate about what it was that they were teaching. They told stories. They got, the students engaged in the information and participating and discussing. And those were the things that I walked away remembering. And when I think back and reflect on this information that I've just shared today with everybody, that's what they were doing. Whether they knew that they were doing it or not, these were the types of things that they were doing that made me walk away remembering the information, retaining it all these years, and still fondly looking back at that and saying, wow, that was a great class. I had a blast in there. And I still use that information to this day.
Yeah, so it's just packaging it in a way that's easy to remember, and I love the S.P.L.A.T acronym, because I think that's a good way to remember when you're preparing a presentation. A good way to remember all of the elements that you should be considering before you go in, which is why it is critical not to wing it.
Exactly. I mean. It just takes a little bit of preparation, and I've told folks that it depends on the stakes. Like, how high are the stakes for this presentation that you're going to give? If it's a low stakes presentation, you're going to talk to a small group of maybe 10 individuals, and you were asked to share just a few thoughts and ideas. Like, that's low stakes. You don't have to spend hours and hours and hours preparing for that.
Right.
But you want to maybe an hour, think about like, okay, what am I going to talk about? What are the 3 key points? What's a story that I can share that's relevant? Just a little bit of time to think about that. Yeah. If it's a high stakes, like you're going into, sell something that's critical for either your job or your business or whatever, or you need to get investors or a bank loan, or, who knows what it is. A job interview. Job interview, that's a presentation. What's the stakes? How much time are you going to put into that? For myself, I've done high stakes presentations where I've prepared 50 plus hours.
Yeah.
And I didn't wait till the last week. I knew well in advance that this opportunity was coming up, and I spent the time that I needed to do, or, to put into it to really craft something that was going to be persuasive, engaging, etc. And that's important to think about is, how important is this? And then that should reflect the amount of time that you put in. But just saying, oh, I got this. I know this stuff inside and out. Great. You may know it inside and out, but when you communicate it to your audience, they're not going to know what the heck you're talking about. And unless you've thought through some of the things that we've covered through the S.P.L.A.T acronym, it's going to fall on deaf ears.
Yeah. No, this is really helpful. And here again, I'm taking notes, Bryan.
That's hilarious.
So where can people find you if they want to learn more about what it is you're doing?
Sure. Well, generally speaking, you can go to whatthespeak.com, where we post the weekly interviews with all of my fantastic guests every Wednesday. You can also go to iTunes, and if you go to whatthespeak.com/audio, that'll take you directly to the iTunes page where you can download all the podcasts directly and subscribe if you like, all of that good stuff. And then on Twitter, I am at whatthespeak, and you can stay on top of all the latest and greatest stuff related to What the Speak, as well as every day, every week, I share great little nuggets of wisdom from all sorts of folks who are communication experts, presentation coaches, etc. So I spend a lot of time going through all of those blogs and online resources that they all have, and pull out some of the great things that I think everybody should be aware of. And then what I'm doing for you guys special, if you really like the S.P.L.A.T acronym, go to whatthespeak.com/diva, DIVA, and that will take you to a page where you can download a cool infographic that outlines the S.P.L.A.T acronym and the different pieces of it. so that you can have that as a handy reference, or you can keep it on your mobile device or print it off next to your desk to really help you think about as you're preparing any type of presentation, how you can implement these 5 key pieces or principles into the presentation that you're preparing.
That's fabulous. Thank you for that. I think
absolutely.
I think that will be well received. Well,
Cool.
Bryan, I really appreciate the time you've taken out of your day. I know you had a lot going on today, and it's been fabulous talking to you. And thank you so much for coming on to Communication Diva. This is absolutely right up my alley, so I'm really glad we were put in touch by our mutual friend John. And thanks again.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure to be on the show, and look forward to staying in touch.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Hey, so thanks for listening to that little bit of a longer episode. I still, every time I listen to it, even during the editing, get a lot out of it. I hope that you did too, and I hope that you'll let Bryan know and let me know if you found that to be of value. If you're interested in sharing your own story through the medium of podcasting, please check out the Libsyn promo. You enter the promo code DIVA from the link on the Communication Diva website, and you can receive up to 2 months of free podcast hosting. So check that out. There are all sorts of resources on the resource page. And until July 31st, the Public Speaking Success Series is on at a pay what you want cost. So you can pay whatever your heart desires for this $97 product, and I will be most happy if you receive it and get something out of it. So check that out until July 31st. That is at gum.co/PUBSS, as in speaking success. That's gum.co/PUBSS. And that's all I have for you this time. I am looking forward to the next episode and the fabulous people that I'm going to be interviewing in the future. I've got a bunch of people lined up, including a TEDx speaker and somebody who has a fantastic business helping to change how people consider a city. And the work that she's doing. I also have someone who is teaching immigrants to speak with a Canadian accent. So all sorts of interesting people coming your way. And thank you again very much for listening. This is Jenn Swanson with Communication Diva.